Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shane Gebauer, the General Manager of BrushyMtnBeeFarm. I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to our Urban Beekeeping webinar. I'd like to give a special thanks to Bee Culture magazine and Kim Flottum, who is with us this afternoon, and as well as the Daily Green, dailygreen.com. Both these organizations helped us quite a bit promote this and advertise it so that people were aware that this was happening. And I owe a great deal of thanks to them, especially Kim, because quite frankly, this was his idea, and a wonderful idea it is. As we get into this, I hope that we'll be able to answer most of your questions out there, but history has shown that there's always more questions than we have time for, and given that we've got 4 other people on the line with us today, and it's a Sunday afternoon, I want to be mindful of their time and appreciate them spending the afternoon, spending the next hour or so with us. In particular, I'd like to thank Tony Burnham, who is with us, Cameo Wood, and Cindy B. We'll start off the presentation with Tony, who has been an urban beekeeper for about 5 years. Started with 2 hives in the Washington, D.C. area. She has a absolutely wonderful blog, and you can see the URL there. It's definitely worth checking out and spending some time reading those posts. I spent quite a bit there before this. There's lots of good information for those of you that are urban beekeepers or thinking about it. And then we'll go to Cameo Wood, who has a store out in the San Francisco area, Her Majesty's Secret Beekeeper. And again, you can see the URL address there. If you're out in that neck of the woods, you should definitely contact her and swing by. I've seen pictures. I haven't actually been there myself, but it looks wonderful. I know that she does workshops there on a range of topics, not simply beekeeping, but I saw that, Cameo, you had a mead workshop either coming up or one not too long ago. Is that right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
So you can get a range of topics at her store. And then finally, we have Cindy B., who I think she'll point out that is her real name. But I guess with a name like that, you're destined to be a beekeeper. She's been doing honeybee removal as well as runs Dillon Bee apiaries down in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I'd like to thank all 3 of you for spending your afternoon with us. I really do appreciate it. As we practiced this last week, I certainly gained a lot of information, and I hope that all of you listening in with us today will find this beneficial as well. Our plan is to have about 45 minutes or so of the 3 of them going through a series of slides, sharing their experiences, some tips and pointers that you may find helpful, and then end up with about 15 or so minutes of question and answer. What we would like to do before we dive right into this, just to help us get a better understanding of the people listening in, what I'd like to do is just put up a quick poll. If you could just take a second and respond to this poll, and I'll share the results with you so that you have an idea of what everyone else is in terms of their experience level. That would be wonderful. So you can see that poll. Just select an answer there. And once I've got most of you responding in, I'll go ahead and close that poll. I've got 56, 66, 72, 76 of you, 82, 85. I'll close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 second. Anyone last second votes? All right, let me go ahead and close that. And now I'll share those results with you. You can see that we've got 40% that haven't started yet, or at least are thinking about starting this year. 17% that started last year, and also 17% that have been doing this 1 to 3 years. 11, 3 to 5, and then a portion of you, 15% that 5+ years. So thank you for that. I've got one more question for you. if you don't mind, and then we'll get into this. We'll start off with Tony. Here we go. One more poll. Just where do you live? Would you classify yourself in an urban area, a suburban area, or rural? I've got 53%, 73%, and I'll close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm closing that poll. 95% of you have voted, and we've got 34% in urban, 43% in suburban, and 24% in rural. So thank you very much for sharing that information with us. It helps us just sort of know where everyone's background and experience levels are. And we'll go ahead and start this off with Tony. Tony, it is all yours.
Well, welcome aboard, everybody. I'm very impressed that you're here and very humbled because, as I say right here, this is one beekeeper's experience. Just in practicing for this webinar and listening to Cindy and Cameo, I've learned just how much urban beekeeping can vary from city to city. And so I want you to know, before we even get started, that all beekeeping is local. In your situation, being in a city, having your priorities, and the nature of the city that you're in are going to dictate a lot of the things that you experience as a beekeeper. And the best I can really do is give you a bit of an overview. Next slide. Do I click? Oh, here we go. The key things I wanted to tell you is, even though you might be an urban beekeeper or thinking about being an urban beekeeper, everywhere that things live is a habitat. Cities are a habitat too, and we're going to try to tune in to some of the things that are peculiar to that urban habitat. I wanted to point out the ways in which cities really do work for bees and why this isn't necessarily a strange or a manipulative choice. When you're in the city, though, certain questions come up all the time. And the ones that immediately occurred to me were about, what do you do about siting your hive in a dense urban environment? And the question that seems to really follow beekeepers both in an urban setting and a suburban setting around are like, what is that relationship with the neighbors? You know, how am I going to handle that one? So, next slide. So, if you think about habitats, you know, the thing about a habitat is it's kind of humbling. You're just one part of it. And in the city, that habitat we live in, you know, that you're going to put your bees in and hopefully they're going to thrive in, it's really balanced around human needs. And bad things happen when you mess with habitats, when you try to knock them out of balance. But at the same time, if you bring the honeybees in, you're actually making what many people consider to be the most powerful contribution to the environmental health of your city that you can make. Because your honeybees won't just be in one garden adding a little bit of green to the space. They actually cruise around your entire urban environment, making plants more viable, causing trees to suck up more carbon, helping all the other critters that need those plants get by.
Tony, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I see a couple of people responding in that they're having a little bit of trouble hearing you, and if you could just speak a little louder, that'd be wonderful.
Certainly. I'm very sorry. Is this better?
It certainly is for me. Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot for telling me that. Okay, so you are in a habitat. Your honeybees, even though it's kind of a funky habitat, can make a wonderful environmental contribution, maybe the best one you possibly could. But even with the importance of that contribution, you have to harmonize your bees with the place where they're living. So you have to consider the site where you put your bees, the people who are going to live next door to your bees, and the legal atmosphere in which you're going to be keeping bees. Next. So I wanted to show you my habitat. This is a Google map, a Google Earth, excuse me, of Washington, D.C. I centered this picture on the Capitol building, but I figured out today that if you go halfway from the center of the circle toward 10 o'clock, there's a site of Beehive right there on the White House ground, though I did not, center in on that one. I wanted you to see once the habitat, you see how wildly really can honey. If I got to dance against the enemy, so I'm afraid. Unfortunately, I can't run this, so I'm going to click. So the first click is.
I'm afraid we're getting some garbled feedback from your mic, Tony. I'm not quite sure what's going on. When we practiced, we didn't have this, so I'm not sure if you're using a different headset or.
No,
But we. Okay.
Are we better at this point?
No, it sounds there's like a reverb to it. I'm not sure if it's an internet connection issue or if it's exactly what's going on.
I can. I've done nothing, so
I'm
not entirely.
That's actually quite good right there.
Okay, well, I'm going to sit still. That's what I'm going to do.
That's perfect. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm very sorry. This is a picture of an urban center. It happens to be the one I live in. It happens to be one where if you look between the center of the circle and about halfway to 10 o'clock, there's a beehive sitting right there on the White House grounds. But I wanted to get Shane to advance click by click through the fancy animations I put on this slide, just to show you why a city can be a good place. Many American cities sit on rivers or lakes. As you see, my city sits on 2 river basins. Bee forage is generally found in places more in park situations and in river basin situations because you get plants that have wet feet, you get a good treescape. And if you click again, you'll see that Washington also has a lot of tree-planted avenues. Now, these are things that you can see from the sky. These are all factors that make the environment pretty pro-bee in a city. We've got trees, we've got water, we've got parks. And if you keep clicking, the stuff that you can't see on Google Earth includes really neat stuff like green roofs and garden boxes, and you can just keep clicking right through here. Community gardens. All of these things are surprisingly positive for bees. Many urban centers, by the way, are increasingly investing in their treescape. Trees are huge for bees. If you imagine a flower has between 1 and half a dozen blooms on it that a bee can go on, a tree can have 250,000. And, you know, one of the things that sometimes makes our suburbs or even our rural areas look green, lawns, which is the next item on this slide, are actually not particularly good bee forage unless you have a lot of clover or a lot of dandelion, which I totally support, by the way. So one of these things, so when you look at a city, though, you might think skyscraper or traffic. What you really should think about is all the places for green living that do exist in a modern American city. And if this is true of Washington, D.C., it turns out to be surprisingly true also of Chicago and New York. And I can't imagine how wonderfully green San Francisco must be. So, next. So, like I said, this is just a quick overview of the points that I just made. Most American cities are near the water. Water is an excellent thing for the plantscape, the kind of plants that bees like. In the city, there just tends to be less agricultural chemical use, specifically pesticides. You just, in a people-heavy environment, you don't get as much pesticide being sprayed around. And there is some evidence that the use of pesticides in general, even those that don't target bees, isn't really great for all the other insects in that environment. The small gardens we have in the city tend to be more intensively and more consistently watered than lawns, and they also contain blooms, which most people's lawns don't. And like I mentioned, many American cities are discovering it's a smart investment for air quality to have green roofs and to have more trees. And finally, and this is something that's particular in Washington because we're not a particularly cold city, we have flat roofs. And if you're an urban beekeeper who has safe access to a flat roof, you are in luck because roofs are an excellent place to keep bees. I do it. Now, one of the things, when I started keeping bees, I took a course. And those of you who haven't started yet, I really you really should take a course which will give you all sorts of tips about how to get started that aren't on this slide. But in the city, I believe, and probably in the country too, one of the ways to reduce the amount of controversy and the amount of danger to the bees and danger to your neighbors is to reduce the visibility of your hive to the average person who doesn't know what a bee is or who thinks everything with wings is a bee. Shane showed us a picture at the start of this presentation that showed someone in a fairly dense suburban setting who painted the beehive to match their house. That's one way to sort of manage to have bees without making them jump out at the average passerby. Now, that's great for securing your bees, but you owe it to your neighbors to choose gentle bees. That means, a race whose behavior is pretty well understood. And things like, I have found Italians and Carniolans to be very good urban bees. Different climates will probably provoke different choices, but if you, once you choose your bees, you also have the responsibility for making sure that if there is a temperament change, that you continue managing your bees so they're nice to people. Swarming, which is actually not particularly dangerous to people, and it's kind of a strength story for your bees, scares the bejesus out of people. You really have to, in an urban setting, be more conscious than most of where your bees are with respect to swarming. You need to get ahead of that and make sure they always have enough space and that they don't sort of take off into the neighbor's yard. I find in my area where we have a consistent dearth at the end of every summer, the bees are sort of at loose ends and tend to be a bit more defensive of their hive. Know if there's a dearth in your area. Know if that might be a time when your bees might be more defensive than usual, and take any measures you need to make sure that, once again, bees and people don't ruin each other's day.
Tony, can you just, I'm sorry, for those, I just remember that there's such a large portion of people that are just getting started and might not know what a dearth is. Can you just explain to us, what do you mean by a dearth?
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. In most places in the United States, there's a period that we call bloom, or the nectar flow, when there's plenty for the bees to do and plenty of nectar for them to go for. In certain parts of the country, there's another period called dearth, where there isn't as much bloom, there isn't as much nectar, and your bees are sort of unemployed and stressed. If you were on a diet and you didn't have a job, you'd be a little stressed too. So that's what dearth means. In my area, there aren't very many flowers and there isn't much rain at the end of summer. So both of those things mean that the flowers don't have much nectar and my bees are a little stressed. So I keep on top of them then. One thing I might do, for instance, is supplementally feed them during that time. And all right, so finally, my legal status. In Washington, my legal status is ambiguous. We have a law that's not bee-friendly, but it's unenforceable. So the fact that I live in a situation where beekeeping is not illegal, but it's not protected, causes me to think long and hard about a number of issues about my bees. I don't want to be the one who causes them to write a law that is not bee-friendly and is enforceable. I'd rather be the one who gets them to write a law that protects beekeepers. In other places, that's simply not the case. In Chicago, things are legal. In Atlanta, things are legal. But once again, you need to know where you stand and how you feel about that. And now, citing the hive, I probably get more questions about this than anything else. There are all sorts of information in your beekeeping textbooks about where the hive should face and whether it should be in the shade or in the sunshine at the edge of the woods. In the city, we don't have as many choices. The first choice you have to make is finding out if you live in a place where a bee really can live. I believe most places are places where bees really can live, but I've recently visited a development where I think the bees will starve for the next 5 years until the trees get big enough. It's really important to put your bees in a place where, in doing their ordinary thing, they don't cause the people around them to be unable to do their ordinary thing. That means keeping bees out of the walkways and the flight paths of people. I need to make sure that when I find that wonderful place where my bees can live and they don't bother anybody else, that I can get there without hurting myself. I mentioned roofs before. I'm lucky. I have a staircase that goes to my roof. If you're thinking about being an urban beekeeper and you have access to a roof, you're not going to be able to haul 80-pound wooden boxes up and down a ladder. You're not going to be able to bring buckets of sugar water to your roof unless you have a really good, safe way of getting there. Now, finally, after getting through all those people-centered questions, I go to the textbook and I pay attention to making the hive go south or putting it as near to water as I can. Basically, these priorities take a back seat in this. Next, that's not me, by the way.
Sorry about that. There we go. A little slow.
There you go. Now, You know what? I've had more discussions on the neighbor question recently than ever before in my life. I didn't tell my neighbors when I started, but I'm not very good at being covert, so all my neighbors found out anyway. If I'd known when I started that I had the opportunity to put bees in out apiaries, that I wouldn't lose my opportunity to keep bees, I would have been more forward with my neighbors to start with. At the same time, in a city, my city has 500,000 people in it. If only 1% of those people are freaky and impossible to speak to about bees, that's like 5,000 people who would not be happy about my keeping bees. So you really do have to think about whether or not you're going to say. If you live in a legally protected situation, maybe it's less of a question. I live in a more ambiguous situation. Because you live in a habitat, because a city is a habitat, it's usually better to get along with the fellow members of that habitat. But I do believe that people of good character can differ on this one. I do believe you will be outed eventually. So, and out apiaries are great. It's wonderful to have two places where you keep bees, because there are some problems you can only solve by moving bees around, and it's great to have a place to go.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. We're going to move to San Francisco now, to Cameo Wood. And there we are. And again, just to remind everyone, Cameo has a store in the San Francisco area. I'm not quite sure where it is, but Cameo, feel free to tell people about that. And that way they can find you and also get some further up instruction on some of the courses that you're offering out there.
Great. Well, I have, my name is Cameo Wood. I have a store in the Mission District of San Francisco. And we have all types of different kinds of classes, mead making, candles, making lip balm, pretty much anything to do with beeswax, honey, propolis, or using any of those things or honey. But one of the things that I'm most interested in is teaching people about urban beekeeping and really encouraging, especially urban beekeepers, to be very observant and aware of what's going on with their bees in the urban environment. As Tony said, one of the most important things with urban beekeeping is making sure that you don't give your neighbors any reason to change the laws or to really sort of be alarmed about having bees in the urban environment. And that's something that people in San Francisco are definitely very sensitive to, because our laws are very permissive of bees. They're considered to be the beneficial insects and not nuisances. So it's something that we're really interested in keeping going here in San Francisco.
Cameo, once again, I'm sorry, but we're getting some feedback, or not some feedback, well, feedback from our listeners that they're having difficult hearing. Can you speak up a bit so that they can hear what you've got to say?
I'll do my best. I haven't changed anything from last time, but yeah. Is this any better?
I think I think the quality of sound is good. It's just a little soft. If you can just speak a little better, I think, or a little louder, I think that'd be great.
All right, I'll be louder. All right, so next slide, please. So with regard to San Francisco, one of the most important things with urban beekeeping anywhere is having a really strong community. And that's something that, at least here in San Francisco, we definitely have. We have a meetup group that that meets every month. We have a really great beekeeping organization. And even people that aren't in formal organizations are still beekeepers that are very happy to help other people. And when it comes to learning about beekeeping and understanding things that are specific to your local area, the best thing to do is to talk to other beekeepers in the area where you are. So next slide, please. So the first thing that I recommend everyone to do is find other beekeepers in your area. Find your local beekeeping club. Ours is the San Francisco Beekeepers Association. The way that I found that was I just typed in the name of my city and beekeeping club, and I found it pretty much straight away. We also use meetup.com. I know that there are meetups in Chicago, New York City, Atlanta, Austin. Pretty much every major city will probably have some sort of a meetup or a monthly club or something going on that you can find out about online. We also recommend that you learn as much as you can about bees, whether it's reading about something, joining a webinar like this. There's lots of resources about urban beekeeping, beekeeping in general, lots of free books and resources. There's lots of things that you can do to learn more about beekeeping. One of the ways that I found out about beekeeping and experienced beekeeping for the first time was I went to a club meeting and I emailed our local email list, and I found somebody who was willing to let me tag along. And I got my hands into a beehive on my very first day ever being around bees. So that's something that you should definitely look into. And that way you can really ask questions about nectar flow, and when do bees start getting cranky, and when is the time in your city when you have to worry about swarming. And I'm sure this is true everywhere, but definitely in San Francisco, nearly every beekeeper that I know has a different type of equipment. Some people have wood 10 frames, some people have wooden 8 frames, some people like huge boxes and all deeps. Other people like me, they just want little boxes, just little 8 frame mediums and none of this big heavy stuff. Some people have styrofoam. Everyone has a different reason and a different opinion about the way that they should be doing beekeeping. So definitely learning about the pros and cons of each is something that I advise people to do. So one of the things that, is sort of a political issue is what to do about your neighbors. And I think that you'll find that, Cindy, Tony, and I have slightly different opinions about what to do. But here in San Francisco, I have about 50 neighbors who live within about 200 feet of me. And it's really hard to go and talk to each and every one of them about how they feel about bees. And a lot of times their initial gut reaction is just to say, oh, I just don't want to have anything to do with them. But most people probably can't tell the difference between a yellow jacket, a hornet, and a bee. So one thing to do is if you do want to go and talk to your neighbors, have a plan about what to do if they're unsupportive. If you decide to go and say, before you have a beehive, that you want to have one, then you should be willing to, find another place to have your hive or have some sort of answer and a plan about what you're going to do. If you have a feeling that your neighbors might be hesitant or resistant, you might consider asking a more experienced beekeeper to help you with that. I know that a good friend of mine who does beekeeping has gone along with a lot of people to try to help communicate to them, their neighbors, about why beekeeping is not a big deal, that this is a new beekeeper who has support from more experienced beekeepers, and because we have such a strong community, it's unlikely that this new beekeeper will be alone in facing any kind of problems that might arise. And one of the things that definitely helps is to know in advance what you can do to mitigate their concerns. So if your next door neighbor has a pool and they're worried about, having all the bees go to the pool to get water, have an answer in hand that you can train your bees to only drink mint tea water, and really start training your bees to not bother your neighbors. So as far as equipment, I recommend to people that they have as much safety gear as they need to feel safe. If you feel safe in just a t-shirt, gloves, and a veil, then or even just a veil and a t-shirt, then that's fine. But you want to make sure that you never have any kind of worry or hesitation about going out and working with your bees. You want to have just enough safety gear that you can put it on and feel comfortable to go and deal with the bees. I also recommend that you have a hive with enough frames and boxes for the whole year. The last thing you want to do is get a starter kit with just 2 boxes, and then about a month later you realize that, wow, you need another box like yesterday, and you don't have it. So when you start out beekeeping, I really recommend for you to get the entire hive all set for the whole year. So the basic tools, smoker, a hive tool, queen excluder, and I definitely recommend to everyone that they get a nucleus hive box. And that's so that you can take 5 frames out of your existing hive with a succession cell, like a queen that's about to be born, so that you can either start a second hive, you could sell that small 5-frame nucleus hive to someone else, but it's also a good thing to have in case you need to be catching a hive. It's just a tool that you really just need to have around, in my opinion. And I also recommend that new beekeepers consider a second suit or a veil for visitors, because once your friends find out that you have bees, you'll find that a lot of people want to see them and visit you. So urban problems. As Tony said, be inconspicuous. Keep your hive away. Here in San Francisco, there are people who have had problems with vandalism and with people walking by, seeing the hive, and just getting freaked out because they see that you have a hive and they just don't know what this will mean for them, whether every time they'll walk by they'll get stung. They just don't know. And it's better just to keep it out of sight because people will worry less if it's not something that they see every day. And also educate people. Help them figure out what the difference is between a wasp and a hornet and a bee, so that next time they see a flying insect around their food and drinking their soda, they're not going to blame your bees. They're just going to know it's just a yellow jacket running around. One thing that you hear all the time is old beekeepers giving their neighbors a jar of honey after their first year of beekeeping, after they didn't tell their neighbor that they even had any bees at all. And the neighbor will have no idea why you're giving them honey because they didn't notice. They never realized that there were more bees around. So, and it is a really great way to earn goodwill. And once they start getting local honey, they're going to love your bees. And as Tony said, observation's key. Making sure that you don't have swarms going into your neighbor's backyard, that they're not being aggressive, and that you don't have a big bee fecal trail just going over everyone else's house is a good way to make sure that you're heading off problems before they happen. This has happened to another friend of mine where there's a big stream of yellow across her neighbor's house, and she basically just had to turn the hive a little bit and things went away. And then once the rains happened, like they are right now here in the spring in San Francisco, all that stuff basically washes out. But it does bother your neighbors if they see part of their house turning yellow. So best to avoid that. But the best thing about urban beekeeping is that it's basically a party. Bees love the diverse flora and fauna. They get to eat anything they want, and it changes all the time. There's also a growing amount of support. We have beehives in the White House, Chicago City Hall, New York City, and outside of America, we have them in Paris, on the Opera House. They're everywhere. There's a lot of support. And you also see them on TV. I mean, Top Chef recently did a big show with the White House and talking about the White House honey. I mean, it's something that people really have a lot of acceptance of. And we've seen the number of new beekeepers in urban cities just rise dramatically. Last month, the New York City Beekeeper meetup had over 500 people. Our club is in the hundreds now. It's been a pretty big growth of beekeepers since CCD was announced, and it's getting pretty great with all the incredibly diverse number of people coming and bringing their new ideas to beekeeping. So this is a great time to be an urban beekeeper.
Great, thank you, Cameo. I appreciate that. I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to throw in here because as people have been speaking, I've been monitoring what some folks have been saying. And Cameo, you mentioned training, quote unquote, training the bees to visit a particular water source. And someone said, can you really do that? How do you go about training your bees to visit your water source as opposed to your neighbor's swimming pool?
The things that we do in San Francisco is we put some mint tea in water with some sugar and like a sugar syrup, and the bees sort of learn that this sweet syrup that smells like mint is something that's good to them, and you can really start weaning them off the sugar syrup and just have water that's flavored with mint, and they'll primarily prefer that because that's something that they have associated good things with over your neighbor's chlorine pool. And so a lot of people have had some good results with that. there was a problem that we had in the South Bay with someone's bees just having this huge trail going from his house to the local community pool. And after a few months of that, basically the bees stopped being a nuisance to their neighbor's pool. So definitely.
And Tony, I had a couple of questions come in regarding another definition regarding an out apiary, and what that really, what would you call an out apiary?
You know, I'm actually, when I was in school, I always thought it was really stupid that we had to learn the word apiary, and now I use it almost every day. Apiary is just a place where you have beehives, and out literally means, usually for me, I look for a place that's about 3 miles from my house. You probably saw that circle on that habitat that I showed you on the city was 3 miles, because that's pretty, you know, normal bee flight range. And if you have a place you can go that's 3 miles from your house, you can actually split a beehive and take it and put it in another place without having all those bees fly back home to the same hive. An out apiary is literally a place that you can go to make decisions about how you manage your bees. You can move bees to and from. You can start queens in one place and introduce them in another place. It's literally just another location where you can practice beekeeping that gives you options for solving problems yourself using the bee stock that you own.
Great, thank you very much, and I'm sorry I missed those. There were a couple questions regarding that term, and I'm sorry I missed those, but we've got that addressed now. Cindy, we're going to go down to the Atlanta area. This is Cindy B., who does bee removals and also operates Dillon Bee Apiaries down in that area. Cindy, go ahead.
Thank you, Shane, and welcome to the South. As you see here, this is a picture of sort of downtown Atlanta, and the building, the round building in the middle of that is the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, where the Metro Atlanta Beekeepers Association meets. I'm on the board of directors for that organization, and we're pretty much in the heart of downtown Atlanta. We have a good many members that we draw from the downtown area, and these people are pretty darn proud of the honey that they can produce in that downtown area. So that's pretty neat. The club in itself has an awful lot of beehives around, and we've had hives in Zoo Atlanta. We've had, and they're actually on the roof of Zoo Atlanta. We've had beehives at the Botanical Gardens there, and we've also had hives in numerous parks and nature centers around the city. So beekeeping in the inner city is certainly possible in the Atlanta area. One of the different, I guess I should say, different kinds of things that I do is honeybee removal. And we can go to the next slide, Shane. There we go. And I've removed probably literally thousands of hives from structures, and many of those have been in the downtown area. One of the wonderful things about this is that people are always just so fascinated. If I'm working high up on a ladder, we go to the next slide. If I'm working high up on the ladder, I tend to get kind of engrossed in what I'm doing, and so I tend to forget what's going on the ground below me. So you know, I may need to fill up a bucket or bring down a bucket of bees, and by the time I get to the ground, I'm always just so amazed at the number of people that have collected down there and are just watching, because they just think that bees are so phenomenal, and they really are. And so that's one of the most wonderful things about my job has been that that I get to talk to people, and I usually have to allow for an extra at least 30 minutes, sometimes even an hour, to answer people's questions, which is it's always been kind of fun. Next slide. Unlike the D.C. and San Francisco area, probably here in the South we have a little bit more space, typically in between the houses. And I think people really kind of like my bees. They like knowing that they're living next to beehives. It sort of gives them the flavor of being in the country, and yet they still have all the conveniences that a big city might offer. The other thing I think that's important to realize is that people in the inner city, I find they have worse allergies than people who live in more rural places. And I think that, this is my opinion, but I think it's probably because the air quality is probably not as good. And so people's immune systems are a little bit depleted and the allergies are an issue. So keeping bees in a neighborhood or closer into the city gives people a ready source for honey, which is right in their own backyard. And of course we all know that eating honey from the area in which you live is really best. So as a beekeeper, it also gives you a ready-made customer base. That's another plus for it. But there's always a downside of everything, and some of your neighbors might be a little cranky about you keeping bees. And occasionally you're going to get some neighbors who are they're really terrified of it, and probably with good reason. If they're not used to bees and they're not used to being around bees, all they have are wives' tales and terrible stories that they've heard from other people. And for these people, a little bit of education will go a really long way. So I like to, if I find somebody who's a little bit skeptical about what I'm doing, I just take some time and sit down with them, and usually we can work things out. Because as was mentioned before, to some people who are uneducated, everything is a bee. You know, the yellow jacket in the ground is a bee. The bald-faced hornet that's hanging in the tree, that's a bee. The wasp in the corner of the window, that's a bee. So a little bit of education goes a long way. And also other neighbors can help out with this too. I'd love to tell a story about one of my neighbors. Before I moved into the house where I live and started the bees, one of my neighbors was growing zucchinis. And I have to say, here in the South, we are very proud of our gardens. Just about everybody is a gardener here. And one of my neighbors, zucchinis were his thing, and he was just going to grow his zucchinis. But of course, his crop was this little pitiful, scraggly bunch of things that looked like maybe they could be someday zucchinis. And so when my bees moved into the area, he was really happy because prior to that, he had been pollinating his zucchinis with a Q-tip. So, you know, he was getting almost no yield. And then when my bees started pollinating the next year, he continued to plant as many zucchinis as he always did. And then when the bees pollinated it, he had this incredible crop of zucchinis, and the whole neighborhood just got sick of zucchinis because he would come around and you would come home and there would be this huge bag of zucchinis on your doorknob, and the whole neighborhood was just really tired of them by the end of the summer. So that was kind of a cool thing because we got to see, everybody got to see firsthand the wonderful things that honeybees do. So neighbors can be really good allies, and they can talk to each other. Next slide. As someone had mentioned before, you don't have to paint your hives the typical white. You can paint them green or brown or whatever it takes to blend into the natural surroundings. The bees don't really care. I have a number of hives in some of my outyards. I have a number of hives that are orange or pink or blue, just, you know, whatever was on sale at Home Depot. So you can paint your hives any color that you want to. And I am of the belief not to tell your neighbors ahead of time, because many times that just gives them the power to say absolutely not before they're educated as to what these bees can really do for their community. So I tend to go with the adage, it's really better to ask forgiveness than it is to seek permission. There's a, you know, kind of a different thoughts between the three of us on that. But another thing that you can do that really is going to alleviate everybody's fears about your bees is to offer a jar of honey. A couple of times a year, I'll just knock on my neighbors' doors and hand out some honey. And you know, oddly enough, nobody's ever turned me down for the honey. So that goes a long way as well, to appease your neighbors. The other thing that I find is really fascinating is the kids in the neighborhood. The kids in my neighborhood have never messed with my hives. They've never cause any trouble at all. And once again, they're great advocates for the honeybee. We, from the Georgia Beekeepers Association, actually has a junior beekeeping day, and actually we do this about 8 to 10 times a year. We just collect a bunch of kids who are fascinated with bees. We take them out to the University of Georgia Bee Lab, and we go through hives. We have a whole bee camp that we go to, and the kids get so excited about this. They go home and they talk to their parents about it. They tell their friends about it. It gets all over school, and you know, beekeeping just gets contagious. So that's really the way it should be. There's no reason why anybody can't keep bees anywhere. And we can go to the last slide here. I think that urban beekeeping is an especially appreciated craft because we need to realize that pollination is not just what ends up on our table. Pollination is all the trees and the bushes everywhere that bees are attracted to, and there's that symbiotic relationship between nature and between trees and plants and the honeybee. And those bees will pollinate trees and bushes in the inner city, which really help to purify the air of the city. So those trees and bushes are the lungs of the city, and we need those little bees that go back to that box that ends up in the backyard. And it's probably, being a beekeeper is probably the single most important thing that someone can do to keep their city healthy. And I just really, really encourage anyone who has a proclivity to do this to check it out and get more familiar with the opportunities in your area, find a mentor, and become a beekeeper in a large city.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I'm going to now. I've been filtering some questions as we've gone along, and I'm going to go ahead and try and pose these to our panelists and get as many answered as possible. Let's see here. I'm just taking care of some technical issues. I apologize. There we are. All right. One question that I had to start things off with, and Cameo, you mentioned this, that you had a problem beekeeper that was in your area, and that sort of got me thinking that really what one person in a setting like this does has a tremendous impact on those people around them, the other beekeepers. Whereas if you're out in the country and perhaps you're a beekeeper that's a bit negligent, your actions are not going to influence the other beekeepers that are also in that countryside. So how do you go about dealing with a problem beekeeper?
Well, at least in San Francisco, we definitely strive to let people know the impact that they're having. We do have a couple of beekeepers in San Francisco that they think swarming is natural and they just want to let their bees swarm all day, and if they go down a major street, well, that's just part of nature. And other people might disagree and say no. Recently in New York City, when they were doing this fight to try to legalize urban beekeeping, there was a huge swarm that landed in front of a video game store, right in the middle of the front door, for about 4 hours until a beekeeper could come and rescue them. And that kind of stuff is really bad public relations. Urban beekeeping is slightly different. You basically just have to let people know that you don't want to get to a point where everyone has to take a test and get a permit to do beekeeping. That, as Tony said, we have to do the best we can to make sure that we don't freak out non-beekeepers, and that this is sort of, community property, and this is, something that we all share, like the environment. And, just because it's, part of the natural environment doesn't need to be it's really offensive or that we deserve more of our share than, we actually deserve.
Cindy, I noticed in some of your slides, in I think the first one where you were doing a removal, you were in a T-shirt, and then the next slide you were in sort of more typical bee garb. What's the difference there? Why one dress one day and something different the other?
Well, that's a good question, Shane. The first slide that you saw, the bees were very docile. It was a nice, bright, sunny day, and I don't like to wear a whole lot of equipment when I'm working. It tends to get pretty hot down here in Georgia, and so heat is an issue. And I don't wear a lot of protective clothing, but I'm pretty much used to dealing with bees. The slide that you saw where I had gloves on and a long-sleeve white shirt, I had that on because I was up high, and I had been running a Sawzall, which was really rattling to the hive. It was a very big hive, and it was also cloudy and slightly raining that day, which we know that rainy days are not good for bees. They don't like to be fooled with when it's raining. And I just needed to dress up a little bit more because I was getting stung. So, you know, I think it was talked about earlier about, you know, dress up as much as you need to feel comfortable around your bees. And there may become a time when you need to just kind of walk away for a while if they're a little bit upset for one reason or another. But yeah, sometimes I can go with just shirt sleeves, and sometimes, you know, you have to dress up more.
Great, thank you. Cameo, you mentioned in your last response the sort of political nightmare of a swarm, and Cindy, you're doing bee removals in an area that, as you mentioned, draws quite a crowd. What would you say to a beekeeper that has been keeping bees in an urban area for a while? Obviously, word of mouth, people are finding out about it. Neighbors are finding out about it, and they're not necessarily upset about it, but they start turning to that beekeeper as a resource. And now there is that swarm that may be hanging from a street sign, or maybe has now moved into a building. What advice can you give that relatively new beekeeper about responding to that sort of event, a swarm that may be inhabiting a building or on a street sign? How should they go about that?
Well, I think a brand new beekeeper needs to get a mentor. It's not something that you should just go at in regard to swarms. It's not something that you should just go at the first time without any kind of experience. Swarms are very docile when they do collect like that. However, it's always good to have a little bit of experience under your belt. As far as actually removing them once they go into a structure, and that means they've gone through a little hole and there's a nice cavity behind that, and they've started to draw a comb inside of a structure. I would not recommend a first-year beekeeper to do that. There's a little bit to it, and you need to know a lot more about bees before you go ahead and expose that hive and do all the construction work necessary to open that up to get those bees out. I've co-authored a book that's coming out, should be out sometime this summer, about how to remove bees from structures. But even so, even with that book, you really need a little bit of beekeeping experience behind you before you tackle something like that.
There's quite a few questions coming in about, I'll just comment on this real quickly, about the slides and a potential recording of this. This is being recorded. It will be uploaded to Brushy Mountain's website in our video library. Hopefully I'll get that up there within the next 24 hours. There's also a lot of questions about equipment. And there'll also be some future webinars that will be covering those topics, so you can stay tuned for those. Tony, since we haven't posed a question to you yet, there's quite a few in here that are talking about sort of securing their beehives. How do you minimize vandalism? Is there any sort of legal protection that's afforded if your hives are vandalized? I wonder if you have any information about that you can share with us.
Well, in any environment, vandalism is a threat to beehives. It happens in rural areas as well as in cities. I myself, the first thing I did was paint my beehives the same color as the trim of my house. And I also wonder very much about controlling access. The other beehives that I have in urban settings, including some that are in a public youth garden. I basically block lines of sight between public walkways or roadways and the beehives, and I really like to look for an area that has some form of access control. I don't think that in most cities a front yard is a good choice, but I do think many backyards can work. I do think that you have to worry about security from not just the security of your beehives not being bothered with, but also I always tell people there is nothing dumber than 3 teenage kids. Anyone together might have an IQ over 100, but by the time they get to daring each other to do stuff, awful things can happen. So I think that out of sight, out of mind is really a wonderful security precaution. Controlling access is the next step to take if you can take it. I really do believe that roofs, especially green roofs, which are increasingly available, are a wonderful, wonderful choice for those 2 reasons. And talking also to other beekeepers in your city, and I guarantee there are beekeepers in your city, about what they have done is probably the best and most relevant advice you can get.
Thank you very much. There was a couple of comments made earlier about how to find places to sort of network and things like that. And there's one person that's commented here that, oh dear, I'm sorry, I've just lost that that link. It's a LinkedIn, which is a network. Here it is, a LinkedIn group called Beekeeping Worldwide. That also apparently has information about beekeeping groups apparently worldwide. So for those of you that are just getting started and think you're alone in this endeavor, there's lots of resources out there to try and network with fellow beekeepers. Also, I'll plug Kim Flottum, who's been silent so far. His website, beeculture.com, if you're in the U.S., has a link. It used to be called Who's Who in North American Beekeeping. They've redesigned their website recently, and I think the name's changed, but it's pretty easy to find. It's a list of beekeeping associations organized by state, which is a great resource to find your local beekeeping association, and that is a really valuable resource that you should definitely exploit. And beekeepers, generally speaking, are some of the friendliest people you'll ever meet. So I strongly encourage you to turn to those avenues to find some people near you that can assist. Usually they're very willing to take you under a wing and into their hive and even come to your place and help you work yours. It's a wonderful opportunity. So I would suggest that. There's a lot of questions here about trying to find out if beekeeping is legal in their area, what sort of legal implications are there if beekeeping is prohibited or they think there is. Also questions about if they want to get something on the books that would allow beekeeping. Tony, you mentioned earlier on that there's nothing, that you're sort of in this gray area, that there's nothing on the books that really precludes beekeeping, but there's also nothing that specifically allows it. I'm wondering if you can just comment a little bit about some places people can turn to get information.
Sure. One of the things that I worked on particularly this summer was with my city council member here in Washington, D.C., Tommy Wells, to those of you who are in our area. We worked together a lot researching existing codes and how Washington compares to other cities. And one of the things that you can do too, especially with the growth of the internet, most urban locations in many, many towns do have their entire city code searchable online. There are only 2 or 3 major portals where most of those are aggregated, and I would consider taking a look at your code. It usually falls under the animal control statutes, but sometimes it's under public health or sanitation. It really does pay to find out what's going on. When I started here in the district, I called our zoning people, I called our animal control people, I called the office of the mayor. Nobody knew anything. And so sometimes calling around doesn't help very much, but I would look for online sources about the city code. And in the Washington area just recently, we have had jurisdictions like Loudoun County legalize beekeeping. I recommend, I think the Loudon statute was a very good one, but for them it was a zoning issue. In Washington, D.C., it would be a change of law. I believe in New York City, the beekeeping falls under public nuisances or public health. Someone could correct me on that one. You need to find out who runs it in your jurisdiction and what the current laws are, and the way I would start doing that is by going online and trying to find a searchable version of your local code.
Thank you very much. There's a couple questions here regarding sort of liability. If bees are allowed and you've got bees in your backyard, what happens if someone happens to get stung? If there is a case like that where your neighbor is complaining and they are attacked, or so they claim, by your bees. And also, Cindy, there's a question here about liability while you're doing a removal. I'd like to take the first part and give this to Kim, because Kim, I know you worked with EAS, which is Eastern Apiculture Society, which is a regional association, eastern part of the U.S., generally speaking, and you were able to get some insurance, if you remember, through there, and I know you've done a lot of research on this. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the liability and insurance options available for the hobby beekeeper? And then, Cindy, we'll go to you and talk a little bit more about sort of the commercial aspect if you're actually doing removals and things like that as a business. So, Kim, what can you tell us about liability and insurance?
Having a beehive, thanks, Shane, by the way, having a bee in your backyard is often considered akin to having an attractive nuisance, much like a dog or a swimming pool. And one of the things that if you have bees on your property, regardless of whether it's legal to have them there or there's been no definition made, so you don't know if it's legal or not, is the first thing you're going to want to do is to check with your homeowner policy and find out what their stance is on this. And some homeowner policies will run screaming in the night away from you when you mention you have bees on your property, and then it's time to change companies. Some companies have no problem with them whatsoever. Independent insurance companies tend to have a broader range and choices of insurance for homeowners with that are hobby beekeepers. So certainly explore all of this before you plunk down 2 or 3 colonies in your backyard and have an incident that you were not intending to have. Somebody earlier mentioned the IQ of 3 teenagers, and this is certainly one of the things that you can experience. But even the neighborhood children, neighbors with complaints, any of these things can cause a question to arise. If you have homeowners and you've already made this distinction, then you've already got a plan and an answer. If you haven't, it can be a very unpleasant surprise.
Great, thank you very much. And Cindy, we'll go to you now to talk a little bit more about sort of the commercial aspect, because you were doing this as a business. What sort of coverage did you have for something like that? What sort of liability do you have if doing one of those removals someone happens to get stung?
Well, for many years I didn't have any liability at all. I never worried about people. We don't have Africanized bees or anything, but I never did worry about people getting stung. Like I mentioned, there were lots of people standing down below that would watch me, and they would just step back if the bees got, a little bit buzzy or flying around too much. But then eventually I did get liability insurance, and that was more because it was demanded of me if I was going to work in, for instance, taking bees out of an apartment or an office building or something of that nature. So I did have the liability insurance. I never had to use it in 14 years. Nothing ever happened. I never broke anything. No one ever got hurt or stung. But it is good to have that liability insurance. I think mine cost me in the $500 a year range. But no one ever got hurt from my bees. And I think, I think the other side of it, it's always good to be precautionary, but the other side of it is you can certainly talk yourself out of out of doing beekeeping if you were to think about all the things that could possibly happen, might happen, and get so worried about that that you never actually do it. Like I said, I've been doing it for a long time, and no one's ever been hurt.
There's questions in here a lot about equipment and getting started, and also some aspects of beekeeping, swarming and things like that, which I'm going to sort of pass on and focus more on the urban beekeeping side of things. Of course, swarming would be an important part of that, but that's another whole topic altogether. And please feel free to email me if your question's not addressed here. We'll do our best to answer them after the fact. And one person, this is a really good point, so I want to read this person's comment. They say, please do not use the term hobby beekeeper. Small-scale beekeeper is more appropriate. We might do it part-time, but our bees work for the environment full-time. So that's a very nice comment, I think. Mark, thank you. There's some additional questions here about Africanized bees, and I guess, Cindy, you would be the most appropriate one to address this, being in the South. I'd imagine Africanized bees sort of heightens people's fears. Hollywood's done a wonderful job of instilling fear when mentioning Africanized bees or honeybees in general. How do you deal with that aspect, and also have you encountered any Africanized bees during your removals?
Well, that's another good question, and to start off, I'll just say that I've never come across any Africanized bees. We know that they're in Florida. They may be in much further south than where I am, but I've never had any troubles with Africanized bees. And a lot of times, you know, you may get a neighbor who will say, I don't want your bees there, it's just a lure for Africanized bees, and the Africanized bee will, the topic will come up. Really, once again, approach it from an educated point of view. If you have a hive of Italian or other such bees that are not Africanized, then that's your first defense against Africanized bees. And just make that known to your neighbors that these are somewhat territorial, and the Africanized bee is not going to want to move in where there's that territory is already claimed. So Africanized bees, it really has not been a problem in the Atlanta area, and I truly don't anticipate it becoming a problem.
Tony, this is a question for you, and I'm going to couple it with a couple other questions that are here. People are asking about rooftops, and of course, in the summer times, they can be quite hot, baking out there in the sun, and of course, in the wintertime, you're up high, and so they might also be fairly windswept. So I'm wondering how you deal with that, and then also there's a question here specifically about how do you move a hive from the country to the city, bring it up an elevator in a 25-story building, and get it to the rooftop. And that opens up sort of additional questions about just sort of the technical aspects of managing a hive that's on a rooftop. How do you go about the logistics of that and the equipment and things like that? I'm wondering if you could just address those points.
Well, beekeeping equipment's heavy pretty much anywhere you put it. But an example, in Washington, D.C., sorry about the stammering, we actually have honeybees on a hotel roof. 2 beekeepers that I've mentored, actually 3, are keeping bees at the Fairmont Hotel in Washington. And we assembled the equipment and brought it up the elevators of that hotel, carried it up a few steps to the roof, and installed nukes there. Nukes are one of the ways in which you can start a beehive. It's from a nuclear colony. In the case of the hotel, we had all sorts of, having an elevator is great, and having little carts to roll things around on are great. But in the case of a residential situation like mine, I move things up box by box. I have a spiral staircase that goes to my roof. And, beehives do come apart. They come apart in the form of boxes. They are sealable. The heaviest thing I ever had to do was to move a split out to another site, and that was mighty heavy, and I do advise getting a friend to help with that. But even, 2 deep boxes full of brood are movable by 2 adult human beings. 2 deeps full of honey, I would not care to carry at once down a spiral staircase, but you don't also have to do that. I'm not sure if that actually answers the question, but it's heavy, and you take beehives come apart and you do it bit by bit, and it's good to get a friend. In terms of what happens on a roof when you position a beehive, I was truly concerned about the heat factor and researched other people who had bees on roofs, and one of the people I contacted had bees on his black roof in Houston, Texas, and I realized that bees who can survive on a roof in Houston, Texas are probably going to do all right in Washington, D.C., though I am conscious of the spikes of temperature that happen on a roof, and I do use additional equipment. They're bee cool units. Because I'm on a roof that actually has a deck with an electrical outlet, I have plug-in literally ventilation fans that have a temperature have a thermostat, that's what those are called, that kick on when it's tremendously hot up there and give the bees a little bit of help. But they are originally from the Near East, which is a lot hotter than Washington, D.C., and they seem to be pretty resilient little critters. I face my bees away from the wind and toward a party wall that jets up out of my roof, and I have found that they are able to deal with the wind situation quite easily. All beekeeping is local. You might need to take additional means. I do know beekeepers who wrap hives in northern locations. In a more southerly location, you might seek more shade than I try to get. But once again, they are pretty resilient, and if you can keep the temperature below where beeswax melts, they're probably going to be all right.
We'll take, we're a little after 5 now, and I want to be conscientious of our speakers' time. I appreciate everyone tuning in. We'll take just one more question, and I'll direct this to you, Cameo. You mentioned when going around to some of your neighbors that may be a bit apprehensive in keeping bees, that you can bring along another beekeeper, more knowledgeable. They can help more accurately address questions and concerns. And this particular question is about where someone might be able to go to get information to help with that process, that maybe they can leave with that neighbor, that they can either view after they've gone or read after they've gone, that could help sort of ease their mind about you keeping bees in your backyard.
As far as information that you could leave to your neighbors, I don't know of anything beyond like giving someone a book or maybe directing them to some information on the internet. But as far as a person, I think that at least here in San Francisco, you can certainly find somebody at our club or in the meetup or on our mailing list and ask if someone that has a few years experience with beekeeping in San Francisco, ask if they would come along with you. And I think that when you're communicating with other people about beekeeping, having someone who will basically sort of say, like, I speak for this person and I sponsor them, and if anything happens, I'm here to support them, and they're not all by themselves. You're not doing this alone in the vacuum. I think that goes a very far way in convincing your neighbors or other people that, even though you are a beginner and you don't really know what you're doing, that you have done your research and you have, read a book and you've gotten other people to, sort of commit themselves to helping you be successful. And I think that when you're presenting this to your neighbors, saying, I've read a book, I have a community behind me, I've done everything to make sure that this is a great experience for everyone. I think that goes a long way when you're trying to communicate to skittish neighbors that this isn't just some sort of a whim and that you don't know what you're doing. I think that this really comforts people. And, worst case, let's say something does happen, like your hive goes queenless. At least they know that, you have someone else that's going to be helping you get a queen, and that you have a plan, and you're not just sort of letting the beehive happen to you. You're in control, and you have an action plan, and you have someone that can help you figure stuff out. I think that definitely goes a long way into making sure that it's a good situation for everyone.
There's just a couple more questions here about accessing this after the fact and where to find it. There's a tab on our website called Resources. You click on that, and then on the right side there's something called Video Library. It will be uploaded there, again, hopefully 24 to 48 hours. It takes a bit for the video to process, but I'll get that up there as soon as possible. Also, people asking about getting started and interested in equipment and things like that, which is wonderful. And we need more beekeepers out there. We need more people championing the cause. One thing that I was impressed with, every single slideshow here, every speaker talked about sort of outreach and meeting with neighbors either proactively or reactively or going into the neighborhood to help other beekeepers. This is really something that, and Cameo, you really emphasize this, the community aspect of beekeeping, that this is something that we're all in together, and so the more beekeepers we get out there, the better off we will be. So you can check out our website for this recording and also future webinars. And Kim, I know you had just a few words that you wanted to say here at the end. And I would just like to say one last time before I turn it over to you, Kim, thank you very much to Tony and Cameo and Cindy for taking their time, sharing their experiences and information with us. If we did not get to your question, I apologize. You can feel free to send me some emails, and I'll do my best to respond to those or certainly get the answers for you, or point you in the right direction. So thanks for attending. And Kim, I'll turn it over to you for now.
Just wanted to wrap this up with a couple of comments. I certainly enjoyed and appreciated the contributions today from Tony and Cameo and Cindy. They far exceeded anything that I thought that this would accomplish. And certainly the organization and support from Brushy Mountain and yourself and the Daily Green. What you heard today plays an important role in the bigger picture that I'm interested in safe and sane local food production. Coupled with the increase in urban gardening and community-supported agriculture organizations and the explosive growth of farm markets, I think we're seeing, and this webinar certainly goes a long way in supporting a sea change in the philosophy and attitude of urban officials towards urban agriculture in general, and certainly beekeeping in particular. Those of us at Bee Culture, and I'm certain Shane at Brushy Mountain and the people who made contributions today are going to continue to explore all of these. And one of the things that I'm becoming even more interested in, or certainly as interested in, are people who are in suburban and housing development settings, because there are more of those people keeping bees than there are beekeepers in urban settings and country settings combined. There are more people living in those settings, and so that's something that we certainly need to explore. So to wrap this up, thank you all listening today. I hope that the information was useful and that the presentations offered practical and applied beekeeping advice. Please watch for more webinars. Shane has pointed out where you can find them. So please watch for more on these and some related topics in the future. And that's all I have to say, Shane. Thanks again for all of your help and support.
Well, thank you very much. And Kim did a fantastic job on trying to get the word out on this through his magazine, his website, and also through his contribution with the Daily Green. The Daily Green is a fantastic website that really helped us, again, get out the word on this, which I'm very appreciative of. The opening photo from Brenda Hobbs came from that website, and I appreciate their assistance. Again, if you have any questions that did not get answered, please feel free to email me, and I'll do my best to get those. I'd really, I can't say this enough, extend my gratitude and appreciation to Tony Burnham, who has her blog site. Let me just pull this back up here real quick so that people can get a sense of these folks and where they are and how to get in touch with them. Tony's in the D.C. area. Thank you very much, Tony, for taking some time and sharing your information and knowledge with us. Cameo, who is in opening up or has opened up, but is in the process of keeping her store running. It's a fairly new store, as I understand it, so I know that she's incredibly busy trying to organize and get that going. Cameo, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I guess it's a little earlier for you. You still have some day left out there on the West Coast. And Cindy B. down in the Atlanta area, who is taking some busy time. She's gone back to school, as I understand it, so thank you very much for taking some very busy time out of your very busy schedule to meet with us this afternoon. Thank you all, and of course, Kim, thank you again for, this was your idea in organizing this and pulling it all together. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and I guess that's it. So thank you, everyone, and we'll hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you, Shane.
It was fun.